Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic. Uh, Go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Howard Eber, I am a recovered addict and alcoholic.
Almost forgot about you for a second. I don't know why. But this is co-production of Big Book Comes Alive and Big Book Compendium, and this is a Way Out book study. And just to bring you guys up the path, the last few weeks we've been really hammering. We've been on step one for 19 weeks now, pretty much, and with a lot of history thrown in there. But I think it's good to take your time. And last week we talked about the three types of drinkers. We have the moderate drinker who can stop for a good reason. The hard drinker can stop for a strong reason. And plus, the thing is they don't have any bodily response to alcohol. And the real alcoholic, they don't respond to reason. And for one thing, when we back up a little bit, is their body's response is lose all consumption once they start, but they don't respond to reason because of this mental obsession. And that's the reoccurring persistent idea of drinking that doesn't respond to reason, lacks choice, completely, overtakes all thoughts, and a lot of it's lies. So we're going to, if this is a part, whatever, to this chapter, it's like after that, we did the Jekyll and Hyde thing last week, paragraph more about the alcoholic. Now we're getting more about the obsession. So we're on page 22. Where it says, this is by no means, we should have probably read this last week, but because it finishes up the chapter, but we're talking about the guy that, the Jekyll and Hyde drinker guy. This is by no means a comprehensive, that means complete picture of the true alcoholic. That's the real alcoholic. As our behavior patterns vary, but this description should identify him roughly. So the next paragraph is kind of like, maybe we heard this from our family, maybe we heard this from our friends, maybe coworkers or bosses. They say, why does he behave like this? That's an interesting question. If a hundred, if a hundred hundreds of experience have shown that one drink means another debacle with all the attempt, suffering, humiliation, why is he takes that one drink? Anything you want to throw in there, Howard?
Well, for one thing, in the previous paragraph, it mentions, our behavior patterns vary. If you want to know how our behavior patterns vary, read the paragraph before that, what Steve refers to as the Jekyll and Hyde material. That talks about all kinds of different patterns of behavior. And here we're asking, why does he behave like this? Why is it he takes that one drink? It's about the insanity of our disease. And when I first read this paragraph, I thought these are just a bunch of rhetorical questions, but they're not. They're placed here for a very important reason. They're placed here so that we may ask these questions of ourselves, and the fact that we don't have adequate answers for them shines a light on our predicament, on our insanity. So these aren't rhetorical questions. These are questions so that you can see where you are in terms of insanity.
Right.
You want me to finish reading
No,
your
why did he takes that one drink? Why can't he stay on the water wagon? What has become of his common sense and willpower that he still sometimes is a good way to put it, displays respects to other matters? One thing I want to say is that sometimes respect to other matters, that window gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But why can't the alcoholic resist the first drink? They have no clue because they don't have, you know, you know, they don't know what they have yet. I mean, when we read this now, we explain it. Like if you read this paragraph way early on, beginning. Now, I had a sponsor one time, this is a paragraph he took me to, and he asked me all these questions. And then when we got through step one, he asked me the questions again. It was very interesting. Do you want anything else on that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you hit the nail right on the head here. This what has become the common sense and willpower he still sometimes displays with respect to other matters. As my drinking, as my alcoholism gets worse and worse and worse, the common sense and willpower that I sometimes was able to pull together and demonstrate slowly dissipates and disappears, and the unmanageability takes over. That's what he means when he says sometimes displays with respect to other matters, because as we proceed into our progression, that sometimes disappears and becomes never.
Hmm. So perhaps there never will be a full answer to these questions. Opinions vary considerably as why alcoholics react differently from normal people. We are not sure once a certain point is reached, there's little to be done for him. We can answer this riddle. So I'm going to talk about this from perspective of, you know, what that riddle is from when I did understand it. Just, my human resources had failed me for years when trying to get sober, trying to stop on my own or went to rehab and then tried to stay sober. You know, I would just go, went to a meeting. And the truth was I hadn't reached this point of hopelessness. I tried to convince myself I had no obsession, that I wasn't as sick as everybody else. I was going, to AA, a place to find recovery, and I couldn't even get past the first step. Since I couldn't, get past the first step, I couldn't go further. A lot of people hit that, and once I saw the allergy obsession, all of a sudden things changed. Howard, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I want to talk about the riddle. It's going to take a couple of minutes, Ben, and I'm going to use some visual aids. But uh, Bill just said about our reactions are different from normal people, and suggested that we cannot answer the riddle. The riddle being, what is this phenomenon of craving? There's the riddle. We now can answer that. We have an answer to the riddle. It doesn't change anything. So the only thing that really changes is we leave out the words phenomenon of craving. It's just craving. We now know the scientific metabolical reasons for why we have this craving. And it'll take a minute or two, but let me show you what I'm talking about. And if anyone wants copies of the stuff that I'm putting up, just drop me a line and I'll be glad to send it to you. Back in the 30s, the phenomenon of craving was part of the doctor's opinion. And in the 30s, they knew very little about metabolism. But today we know lots about it. Let me blow this up, maybe it'll be easier. Let's keep it. Is that better? Today, we know if you put anything into your system, piece of bread, piece of beefsteak, the body and the mind recognizes what it is. And certain organs in the body begin to produce enzymes, and these enzymes attack the food, break it down into usable and non-usable items. What the body can use, like proteins, amino acids, vitamins, it retains. What it cannot use, it dissipates through the urinary and intestinal tract. That is called metabolism. Today, we've proven that the doctor's opinion is no longer an opinion, it's true. And just as the stress, just this, and just to stress the obvious, this isn't AA official information. We wouldn't get into why we're allergic because that's an outside issue and it might bring controversy. But this information, which was presented a few years ago by members of the medical community, is so interesting and has such depth and meaning for people like us. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't take a look at it. So let's look at it for a minute. Take, for example, the normal social drinkers who are able to drink safely. They are, quote, at ease with alcohol. They take a drink or two, their mind and body recognize it, they produce the enzymes, The enzymes attack the alcohol. The enzymes break it down to acetyl, I can never pronounce that name, acetaldehyde, then breaks it down to diacetic acid, and then it breaks it down into acetone. In the final stage, it becomes a carbohydrate made up of water, sugar, and carbon dioxide. The water is dissipated through the urinary and intestinal tract. The sugar is energy which the body will burn and store, and the carbon dioxide will be dissipated through the lungs. In the normal, let me get this up. In a normal social drinker, this takes place at a rate of about 1 ounce per hour. While it varies with different people, the average seems to be about 1 ounce per hour. And if they don't drink more than 1 ounce per hour, they can't get drunk. Their body metabolizes it, burns it up, and gets rid of it at that rate. Very seldom do you see a social drinker consuming more than 1 ounce an hour. If you're with them and they're drinking more than an ounce an hour, you better get out of the way because they're going to puke after a while. They'll either go to sleep or they'll puke on you. One of the two is the norm. When alcoholics put it in our body, the same thing happens. Their body and mind sense it. The enzymes production starts. The enzymes attack the alcohol. They break it down to acetaldehyde, can't pronounce it, then into diacetic acid and to acetone. And here's where the problem lies. In the final stage, it seems though our bodies, the enzymes necessary to break down the acetone into the simple carbohydrate are not the same as the body of the non-alcoholic. Today, it stays in our body for a longer period of time as acetone. It doesn't get broken down any further. And it's proven that acetone ingested into the human system that remains there for a period of time will produce an actual physical craving for more of the same. This shows how alcohol is not completely processed in the alcoholic's body and the resulting havoc it can create. In a non-alcoholic's body, that acetone goes through that final stage. It converts to carbohydrate and it rapidly dissipates. In our body, it stays there long enough, allowing the craving to develop, which demands the second drink and the third, and so on. The alcoholic's acetone level goes up. And if the acetone is what causes craving, then the craving goes up and becomes harder and harder with each successive drink. Now you put in the third and the acetone increases, causing the craving to intensify. That demands a fourth, and the acetone level increases again, and the craving increases again and gets greater and greater and greater because the more you drink it, the more you crave it. And it's just endless once it starts. We now know that alcoholism is a progressive disease. And this is the other part of it that's interesting. This is true whether we're drinking or sober 20 some odd years. In relation to the physical aspect, for each year we grow older in sobriety, our bodies grow older too. And as the body ages, the production of enzymes needed to break down the alcohol slows down as well. If an alcoholic picks up a drink after 20 years of sobriety, the acetone that will now remain longer in his system will trigger stronger cravings than he's ever had before because he's 20 years older. Our bodies change as we get older. The drinking will be worse, makes it much harder to stop because we don't pick up where we left off. We pick up as if we never stopped. So not only do we have a physical illness, it is progressive because of the damage to the body and this is always left out, the aging factor. When we pick up after a period of time, a period of abstinence, our body has changed. Our capacity to break down these chemicals have changed. So the amount that we need, in Bill's words, falls off like a ski jump because we have aged and our body can't break it down as well as it used to. Now that we can see that, we can fully accept the fact that we can no longer successfully drink alcohol. And until we see this, we always feel that there had to be a way we could drink without getting drunk and it damn near kills us. But now that we can see it, we can more readily accept the fact that we can no longer drink like other people, which means the phenomenon, the riddle, has been answered. Steve?
I love that. So, it's when before I spoke for Howard, I explained my perspective from before having the knowledge of the allergy obsession, where I couldn't figure it out. That was my real, I couldn't figure it out. I had, Howard spoke a lot about acetone. So there's a guy who's a very good friend of mine, and he decided to cut out the middleman and started drinking acetone. And, if you ingest acetone, it doesn't kill you, not right away, but it gets you drunk. But the difference is, it's just like that you get extreme headache and you drink more to get rid of that. You get dizziness, confusion, nausea, feeling of drunkenness, but rapid heartbeat, low blood pressure, and coma after doing it for a while. This guy did it for about 4 weeks straight, drinking acetone. He's basically cutting out the middleman. you know, he was going right to it. And the crazy thing was, within even and he got out of the coma, got out of the hospital. Did he go to meetings? No, he went right back drinking. And once in a while, would just take a small little bit of acetone just to get where he wanted to be. Within 4 months of that, at 37 years old, he had what's called alcoholic cardiomyopathy. Now, a 75-year-old might get cardiomyopathy, or 85-year-old, but this guy at 36 had cardiomyopathy, and they said he had the heart of an 87-year-old. You know, and his story is amazing, but that's what he did. And the other thing that's crazy with acetone is, I did alcohol as my main thing, but I also did dope, and I would shoot up crank once in a while. Well, crank sometimes methamphetamine would be washed with acetone. So for some reason, I would go get this meth and I would, do my thing, and all of a sudden I wanted to drink because there was acetone in and so anyone that says there's no physical craving to chemicals, beware of what's in the chemical. So let's go back to where we were. It says, and I love this part.
Incidentally, Maureen put a copy of what I just read up in the chat, and I put a PDF if you want to download it as well. So you have copies of what I just read. Sorry to interrupt you,
Oh,
Steve.
no, and that wasn't a promotion to go drink acetone either. That's an amazing deep story. It's not the first person I heard say that too. Um, So it says, we know that while the alcoholic keeps away from drink, as he may do for months or years, he reacts like other men. Now, take in mind, let's just forget the years part. Let's put months in there. If the guy's now look, comparison of a person that's doing it dry versus with the program, you know, they're both going to react like other men, but it's going to be a different way, and then it's going to be other men for the solution. Of course, when anyone's off of alcohol, they're going to react somewhat differently. And says we're equally positive that once he takes any alcohol, whatever, into his system, something happens both in the body and the mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. It says the experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. So these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby selling the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, this is where it confused me at first. Therefore, I mean, with the explanations that we're giving and stuff, therefore, the main problem of alcoholic centers in the mind rather than the body. Now, when we did, history and stuff, and I spoke about, the old treatments of alcohol, they focused on the mind. There was no, they never looked at the body. It was a mental aspect, and they put people in mental institutions because of that, right? So, and then they tell us, well, a person, you hear people say you can have an obsession with alcohol, but you may not have the allergy, which would mean the allergy makes you a real alcoholic. But here they're saying for the real alcoholic, the main problem of the real alcoholic centers in the mind rather than the body. And you get that right from, it would be pointless if our friend never took the first drink, you know. So while the allergy makes us a real alcoholic and we go on a run, the obsession puts it back in our body, like food. You know, if I make a pizza, you know, I I don't get full by staring at it. I got to pick it up and eat it, you know. So the obsession puts us back into our bodies against our will. So the main problem must be the mind. And that, some people read that and they go, oh, that's all I need to do is not take the first drink. So if your mind doesn't tell us what to do, we won't start. And the steps remove the obsession to drink. You know, step 10 promises says we had not sworn off. The problem has been removed. So Howard, do you want to comment on any of that stuff there?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, it says that the observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took first drink. In other words, gave into the obsession. For us to take the first drink means we give into the obsession. And what happens then? It sets in motion the terrible cycle of craving. Therefore, the problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body. If I asked, there are 36 people here, if I asked every one of you to write down 5 of the craziest things you ever did in your life, I guarantee the craziest thing that you ever did will not appear on that list. Because the craziest thing that we do as alcoholics is take that first drink knowing what's going to happen. And we take it stone cold sober. The stupidest thing, the dumbest thing, the worst decision we ever made, we made sober. And from page 23 to page roughly about 43, we're going to look at this and we're going to look at it from the point of view of this question. Why am I powerless over alcohol before I take the first drink? Which means we're talking about the obsession. For the next few pages, we're going to focus on the mental obsession. We're no longer talking about what happens when we ingest alcohol. That's done. We're finished with that. The next 20 pages focuses on the question of why am I powerless before I take the first drink? You want to continue, Steve?
Yeah. So here's the thing. People, a person that does the steps can walk into a liquor store and is not going to break out into cold sweat and hyperventilate. A person that doesn't do the steps, turns white in the liquor store and salivates and everything like that. And so the big emphasis of them recovering is fighting alcohol. We cease fighting anything. That's why I say alcohol is not cunning, baffling, and powerful. The obsession is cunning, baffling, and powerful. It's like what Howard says, I'm going to drink or use this despite knowing all the consequences involved. This is the only thing on this planet where we have the consequences that scale this high. That doesn't stop us from doing it. If I stick a knife in my hand, I'm not going to stick a knife in my hand over and over again. So no, now like Howard said, we're going to go deep into the obsession. If you ask him why he started the last bender, the chances are he will offer you one of 100 alibis. So what's an alibi? It's just lies. When it's alcoholic lying, when their mouth's moving, right? So excuses. You know, the whatever the lie is. Oh, I hung out with the wrong people. We'll say I went to the wrong place. You know, um, I went to the slippery places that stuff you hear at meetings, and you go back out and you blame it on circumstances of the people. You know, that person will never stay sober blaming on external circumstances. I shouldn't have gone there, but You know, I mean, look at what rehabs teach us. Relapse prevention. Don't go to those places. Don't go to those slippery places. Don't, you know, we'll get more into that later in the book, but you know,
Trigger.
exactly. And sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in the light of the havoc an alcoholic's drinking bout creates. Because why? Because the obsession's doing the talking. You want to say anything on that, Howard?
No, it just reaffirms that taking that first drink is the worst decision we ever made, and we made it sober. It just reinforces that.
So look at this. This is an interesting thing he says here. They sound like the philosophy of the man having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so he gets rid of to feel the ache. I mean, think about his insanity. He's comparing treating the obsession of having, you know, having it's on treating the obsession by having a drink to beating ourselves in the head with a hammer to treating a headache. Now, first of all, what's worse, having a headache or hitting yourself in the head with a hammer, right? And so, you know, so and with the mindset that the headache's going to go away, and we put alcohol in our body to relieve the obsession, and it sets the cycle in motion. Now, how many people drink because they don't like their life and they don't have the allergy? You know, they can have a couple of drinks. People do that every day, not for alcohol, real alcoholic. But it makes total sense what they're saying here. We need, you know, anyone you can, if you're ever at a meeting and you see a guy in his third or fourth meeting, or maybe his second meeting, he raises his hand and talks, and you can tell, you talk to him after the meeting, you can tell he's got that upset. You can tell he's a real alcoholic. And look at him a month later and he hasn't done the steps, and you can just tell that obsession is whooping his ass because he's dry taking it on. So if you draw this fallacious reasoning to the attention of an alcoholic, he will laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk. I love this. Once in a while, he may tell the truth. It does not say he will tell the truth. It says once in a while. And the truth is strange to say is usually he has no more idea why he took the first drink than you have. So, you know, until you have this understanding of this allergy obsession, you have no idea what they're talking about here. You know, but when that, even with the understanding of the allergy obsession, is not going to take away the allergy, the obsession. No, I mean, they, you know, people always say there's nothing worse than having a mind full of recovery and a body full of dope. I always say there's nothing like having a mind full of the information of the allergy obsession and drinking. Because whenever I relapsed the last couple of years, I was out there and I knew what the allergy was. And people would ask me, probably ask me one time, a guy said, "Do you remember when the allergy hit you?" And I said, "Yeah, it was usually the fourth time I drank because the other times I was drinking to forget everything." But then all of a sudden, I remember having a drink and getting relief, and all of a sudden I want more. I go, "Oh, that's what they were talking about." Howard, do you want to say anything about this stuff?
Yeah, I love the fact that she laughed at that first sentence. Once in a while, he may tell the truth, and that is true. When you ask an alcoholic who goes out after a period of sobriety, and you ask them, "Why did you do that? What happened?" They're going to tell you the truth, because you know what they say? I don't know. I don't know because I was not here at the moment. I was out to lunch when that decision was made to take that first drink. I don't know why I did it because I was out to lunch. I wasn't functioning with the whole mind. That's the beauty of it. I love that first line because it's so true. We tell the truth and we don't even realize it because we say we don't know because we don't.
Hmm. Some drinkers have excuses, which they are satisfied part of the time, but in their hearts they really do not know why they do it. Once this malady has a real hold, they are baffled a lot, confused. There is the obsession that somehow, someday, they will beat the game. We all had that thought, you know. One day I'll get tired of this. One day I'll outgrow my alcoholism. But they often suspect they're down for the count. So they look at it like this. This is, I call the middle of the road real alcoholic, is the guy's sitting there and he's going, I'm going to outgrow this one day. But in the right hand, they say they know they're screwed. And so they're really, in a bad place. And, there's another obsession right there, you know, the recurring thought that we can beat this game, but we know we're screwed. Plain insanity.
And that's the big lie. That's the big lie, is that one day, somehow, some way, I will be able to beat this game. And you know what? It also makes me think of the fact that if there was a pill, if there was a potion that would allow me to drink normally, I wouldn't take it. I don't want to drink normally. I see what people look like when they drink normally. I'm not interested in that. As far as I'm concerned, that is alcohol abuse, because you're not using it for the reason for which God intended it to serve. So I think that's the mistake. But be that as it may, we can continue.
Is how true this is, few realize in a vague way. Their families and friends sense that these drinkers are abnormal. But everyone hopefully awaits the day when the sufferer will rouse himself from his lethargy and assert himself of will. That may never happen, you know. Um, the tragic truth is that if a man be a real alcoholic, so that's a condition right there, the happy day may never arrive. He has lost he has lost control. It's allergy. At certain point in drinking of every alcoholic, not some, every, he passes into a stage where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is absolutely no avail. Child's situation has already arrived in practically every case long before suspected. I've heard people say in the rooms, um, once you have a desire to stop, you're done. That person's not a real alcoholic. It says that. If someone says that they never had the obsession, and tradition three says the only requirement for a membership is desire to stop drinking. That's a totally different thing. How many times do you have a desire to stop drinking and still drink? You know, I think they forget that that term is for membership, and that's the stuff that kills real alcoholics by hearing that stuff. You know, there's no power in desire to stop. How long? Like I said, how long do we say that? You want to say anything on that, Howard?
Yeah, yeah, that last sentence that they hope he'll arouse from his lethargy and assert his willpower. See page 20, paragraph 4, because it talks about a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. And to say that we will arouse from our lethargy, and lethargy, incidentally, just means abnormal laziness, abnormal sluggishness, apathy, drowsiness. In other words, lack of will. That if we would only apply our will, everything would be just fine. And it's interesting, one of the words that Steve read in that paragraph was they sense that the drinkers are abnormal. Let's go all the way back to the doctor's opinion, where we were first told that we have an allergy. And if you remember, we defined the allergy back in the doctor's opinion as what? An abnormal reaction to any food, substance, or chemical. Abnormal reaction, not normal, not typical. And that's what they're talking about here. In the 1939 dictionary, the word abnormal is defined as a departure from the standard or the rule, out of the ordinary, unnatural, or irregular. So here we are 20 some odd pages later, and we're still talking about the same thing. And one last thing is Maureen was kind enough to put up on the chat my comments about losing the power of choice to stop. We've lost the power to choose to stop once we start because of the allergy. And we've lost the power to choose not to start because of the mental obsession that Steve has been talking about. So the obsession makes us drink, starts us drinking. The obsession starts the drink, but the allergy makes us drunk. And in the words of Dr. Silkworth, he took it a step further. He said it's the obsession that condemns you to drink, but it's the allergy that condemns you to die.
Right.
Good news, folks.
So we're gonna have some fun in here right now. You know, we often hear hard drinkers and regular A members, hard alcoholics say slogans that are in this book, but they look at them as almost scripture, almost like or something. There used to be a meeting I used to go to another city out here called we my friends and I nicknamed it the Barkers meeting because all they did was bark out slogans. So like these slogans, people say like what's some of them? Stick with the winners. If my ass falls off, you'll sew it back on for me. Meeting makers make it. Put the plug in the jug. Don't drink one day at a time. Don't drink no matter what. Don't drink between meetings. Don't drink and go to meetings. Don't forget your last drunk. We heard that one a lot. Don't go back to the slippery places. Fake it till you make it. I mean, just for today, keep coming back. So stick in the middle of the herd. We know that one. Call your sponsor every day. Call your sponsor if you want to drink. So today, people, love to post facts online, and someone will fact check them. Though here's factcheck.org. I'm going to shoot down your thing. You said, well, we're going to fact check these slogans with the big book. So people say, and Howard has mentioned, I chose not to drink today. Right? I chose not to drink today. Look what it says here in the big book. Here's a fact check. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons the obscure, have lost their power of choice and drink. You hear that like the gospel meetings. I chose not to drink today. And for years I thought that was a program. Didn't take me anywhere. I tried it because I heard people with 40 years saying it. How can you make a choice not to drink with an obsession of the mind? Let's look at the next one. People say, think, think, think.
Yeah.
Fact check, big book fact check. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. So how can I think myself through or away from a drink if my willpower is non-existent? Better yet, if my mental thinking is stuck in the obsession, nearly all thoughts. It's like one thought goes in here, it's a nice day today. It comes out this other ear, it's a nice day to drink. So think, drink, think for the obsession turns into what? Drink, drink, drink. Howard, do you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, for one thing, this first line, it says the fact is most alcoholics for reasons yet obscure. This was written in 1938, and he said the reasons were obscure. Obscure just means something that's not easily understood. And guess what? It's just as obscure today as it was in 1939. That's no difference. And the things that Steve just pointed out about we've lost the power of choice, our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. That is why good intentions, firm resolve, sincere desires to stop are of absolutely no long-term use for the alcoholics. But the true alcoholic, the memory of how bad it was, will not keep us sober long. Left to our own devices, we will inevitably, 100% drink again. So that making a decision not to drink is an inadequate, insufficient defense against the drink for the alcoholic. There's a lot of inadequate, insufficient methods. Here's another one.
You know, here's the thing is, it said in the paragraphs, a few paragraphs back, he may be good with respect to other matters. With alcoholism, he's, you know, strangely insane. That's what they're talking about here. This guy might be able to, you know, be 150 pounds overweight and lose all his weight by going to the gym, but he can't beat alcoholism. Maybe he's a guy that is a salesman that can sell anything. He can talk his way out of any situation, but he can't beat alcoholism. Strangely insane. Look, so people say at meetings, and they say in rehab, don't forget your, you know, keep your bottom green. Don't forget your last drunk. You know, that's going to keep you sober. Here's the fact, big book fact checks. We're unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of suffering and humiliation even a week or a month ago or a day ago or a minute ago. And I'm going to throw those in there because that's what it works. So the awareness of past suffering will not come to mind. Look at the story of Fred. Everything that occurred to me about alcohol did not come to mind at all. Even you know the words in there. So the past suffering doesn't even come to mind when we want to detour ourselves away. You know, that's why people scratch their heads at us. You know, program remembering suffering, that's not very healthy for that one way. And but relying on remembering to beat, you know, the suffering, to beat the mental obsession. How many times did I say I never thought this would happen to me again? Or when you come out with black eye, you're parked in front of the liquor store. Or after, you know, what happened last time, there's no way I can get drunk again. Or I can't believe here I am again. But trying to stay sober in the last drink, if you're an alcoholic, that's insane. I mean, this thing, I remember, you know, all the information I had, get out of jail. You know, I was in jail for one time for like 7 months, county jail. And that was the longest, I think, second longest I ever was there. And I got out the last 3 weeks in there, I started going to meetings in there because I want to prepare myself when I leave. And I lasted about 12 hours when I got out. And I thought this suffering and humiliation of being in jail would work. Howard, you want to comment on that?
Well, you mentioned it, these are great examples. You want to see examples of what we just talked about? See Jim on page 36 and see Fred on page 41. You may want to make a note there to see those 2 points for examples of what we're talking about. And Steve read a line that said, we are unable at certain times, key word, certain. That means absolute. It's going to happen. It's not like maybe it'll happen. It's a guarantee that there is going to come a time when we will be unable to recall with sufficient force the pain and the suffering. Guaranteed. It's a solid guarantee that that will happen, which means that's another inadequate, insufficient method of combating this. Making a decision to not drink is not going to be enough.
You know, we're in a society of non-drinkers, right? That most of them are alcoholic, you know. And the fact is not every single person is going, you know, they come to AA and they have no idea what they're alcoholic, but then they hear just don't take the first all these slogans and they start thinking, oh, it sounds easier than it is. But it's like, but you know, the same thing is like my grad sponsor used to say, you know, he said some people diet by eating healthy food and some people try to diet at McDonald's. You know, there's a lot of people in AA that try to diet at McDonald's, you know, by not doing the steps, just going, you know, doing AA light, as I like to call it. Here's one of them. It's like, so what do we hear? Probably the biggest saying, if you know, don't take the first drink and you won't get drunk. Big book fact checked, without defense against the first drink. You know, you don't take the first, you know, just don't take the first. I mean, how's that going to work if you have no defense? If a sports team, if the Warriors have no defense, they're going to lose games and they're going to lose bad, you know? And I can't believe this saying still is popular in the rooms. It makes zero sense. It's right there with don't drink no matter what, or put the plug in the jug. As long as there are members who can do that or think they can do it, we'll always hear it. And remember Bill, we don't have to go back there, but when he woke up and it had to be stopped, he was through forever. He won't take this. And then shortly afterwards, he came home drunk. That's when he tried the first drink program. I'm sure most of us have at one point or another. Some of us may have tried it before we ever went to AA. Cutting back. So let's keep going here.
Yeah.
The almost consequences. So those are all fact checks. So when you hear the slogans, hopefully you'll see them differently. The almost certain consequences that follow taking even a glass of beer do not crowd into our mind to detour us. If these thoughts occur, they are hazy, rarely supplanted with the old thoroughbred idea that this time we shall handle ourselves like other people. Or they say, what, screw it all. There is a complete failure of the kind of defense which keeps us from putting our hand on a hot stove. I burned my hand on the. I was barbecuing one time, and it was smoker, and the chimneys where you put the charcoal into. And I got a bad burn on my arm up here. It's still there, and how I did it was I put the charcoal down and I put the chimney behind me, and I reached back. I probably smoked meat 200 times since then. I do not every time I'm done now, I take the chimney and I put it 10 feet away from me because I have the type of defense that keeps me from wanting to get burned again. Now, that's insane when you look at it, I never wanted to go back and feel that burn again. So look at this. The alcoholic may say to himself in the most casual way, it won't burn me this time, but so here's how. Perhaps he won't think at all. That was like me the last few years. How often have some of us began to drink in a nonchalant way, and after the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 10th, 20th, pounded our head down at the bar or at home or wherever we were in the car and said to ourselves, for God's sake, how do I ever get started again? Wow. Only to have that thought supplanted, well, I'll stop with the sixth, or what's the use anyhow? That's the big glass of ethanol, you know. Yeah, we'll squeeze this in. We got some more slogans here we're going to look at. Like meeting makers make it. Just keep on guard and go to meetings. When things get rough, the rough go to meetings. I need a meeting, blah, blah, blah. Right? So the big book's got a fact checked on those. And it says, when this sort of thinking is fully established, an individual with alcoholic tendencies, allergy obsessions, probably place himself beyond human aid, no human power, and unless locked up may die or go permanently insane. So there's a prognosis of alcoholics. We must be locked up or go permanently insane in the asylum. How is a room full of other powerless people going to, help a person beyond human aid? These are stock early facts that have been confirmed by legions of alcoholics throughout history. I mean, real alcoholics cannot pull these things off we've gone over, human power. A person can stay sober on human power, cannot stay sober on human power. They must do the steps. If I'm beyond human aid, how can I keep, I'm not going to be able to stay sober one day at a time, 1 minute at a time. We're powerless. Zero power. There's not a light flickering. Zero. Howard, you want to comment on that?
Yeah. There's what I refer to as the famous italics on 24. I love that paragraph. And it ends with a line that says, "We are without defense against the first drink." And I'm going to suggest that you cross out the word drink and above it write thought. We are without defense against the first thought. And the very next paragraph begins by talking about the absolute certain consequences that enter into the mind. Into the mind. That's a thought. Are replaced by the old threadbare idea in the mind. in the mind, something that's an idea is in our mind, that this time we can handle it like other people. There's the big lie. There's the big lie. The alcoholic may say to himself in the most casual way, the alcoholic may say to himself, you know what happens? When the alcoholic talks to himself, he gets the same asshole's opinion over and over and over again. So anytime you hear an alcoholic talk to himself, you know what that's going to lead to. Um, and what was the other thing? Um, oh, so damn. Perhaps he doesn't think it all. Begins to drink. Oh, the last paragraph. I'm sorry. When this sort of thinking, if you're not sure what this sort of thinking it refers to, above the phrase this sort of thinking, write C italics above. That's what we're talking about. When this sort of thinking is fully established in an alcoholic, what sort of thinking? See page 24, paragraph 1. We're beyond human aid. And one of the things I always think of when I read the end of this page where it talks about beyond human aid, for one thing, if we are beyond human aid, fellowship alone is insufficient, because that's what human aid is fellowship. And these stark and ugly facts have been confirmed by legions of alcoholics. And it reminds me of Dr. Jung's quote to Bill, which is, it takes a spirit to defeat a spirit. And alcohol is a spirit. And it
Right.
takes a spiritual answer to defeat the spiritual problem. That's it for today.
So, you know, this human power, lack of human power, I mentioned a minute ago, when I go to a book discussion meeting, I love throwing it in there because it pisses people off. And I always remind them, you don't have to go there. On page 99 of the big book, it says, remind the prospect that his recovery is not dependent upon other people, it's dependent upon a relationship with God. And back 25, it says, but for the grace of God, there have been thousands more convincing demonstrations. Somebody want to, but cannot. I was graced by two gentlemen that came in my life in 1996. I didn't get sober until 2000, but those guys broke down the allergy obsession, and I got a sponsor and failed. But I came back looking for those guys, and I got involved with that group, and that was a fellowship I knew. I want to close out of the 12 and 12 because it's a good way to close everything we went over tonight. And I'm going to read from the 12 and 12, page 24. Because it leads into what we're doing next week really well. It says, why all this instance that every AA must hit bottom first? The answer is that few people will sincerely try to practice the AA program unless they have hit bottom. For practicing AA's remaining 12 steps remains the adoption of attitudes and actions which almost no alcoholic who is still suffering can dream of taking. Who wishes to be rigorously honest and tolerant? Who wants to confess his faults to another and make restitution for harms done? Who cares anything about higher power, let alone meditation and prayer? Who wants to sacrifice time and energy to carrying A's message to the next sufferer? No, the average alcoholic, self-centered extreme, doesn't care for this prospect unless he has to do these things in order to stay alive himself. Under the lash of alcoholism, we were driven to AA, and there we discovered the fatal nature of our situation. Then and only then do we become open-minded to the conviction and as willing to listen as the dying can be. We will stand ready to do anything to lift this merciless obsession for us. So
Of power. That was our dilemma. And that's exactly what Steve just mentioned. Under the lash of alcoholism, we're driven to AA, and there we discover the fatal nature of our situation. We have identified the problem, lack of power. Great example.
here's the thing. We started on page 17 in this chapter. And it's titled There's a Solution. It takes them to get all the way to 25 to get us to title of that chapter. And we'll start there next week. I'm going to stop the recording.